only into waking them up. Likkutei Sichot, volume 4, section Parshas Matot, in section 4. So we said last time that there's a difference between, obviously it's very obvious, but he gives all the examples, that the person who is annulling the vow has to be on a higher stature than the person who's making the vow. Now he says, this all is not just in general, it's also in the individual. Meaning with... What? Because he has control over her at some level. He has control over his daughter's profits, not to mention other aspects, but he's not talking about that. He's only talking about because not every vow that she makes can he annul. It's very important. There's a difference between a daughter and a wife. By the daughter, I think he can annul everything. By the wife, he can only annul those things that pertain to herself, but not if she makes a vow that pertains to something other than herself, which a person can do. Okay, so now he says this is also true in the individual. How is this in the individual? Because now he says, there's a big principle in Torah, which is that the Torah speaks in general principles and in particular principles. The theorems that come out of that general statement. It's the same thing regarding the vows and their annulment. Usually these are two different people, the person who makes the vow and the person who annuls it or cancels it. But in the individual case, every person has the ability to do the symbolically same type of work inside himself, meaning the work of making a vow and the act of annulling it. The person has these two faculties within himself that he can do. How does this happen? יש דרגה בנשמה שמבחינתה צריך שיהיה נדר ומצויה דרגה גבוהה ממנה שמבחינתה צריך להיות הפרת והתרת נדרים. So there's a level in the soul. It's interesting, he calls them levels in the soul. We'll see why in a moment. There's a level in the soul that requires the making of vows, and there's a level in the soul which requires annulling them and not using them. So in other words, what is he saying? He's saying here that we can look at this as a hierarchy, as why is he saying higher and lower? Because the lower level is the level that's more ingrained within the material world. So that level has to make vows in order to survive in its immersion in the material world. The level above it doesn't need that. Now the reason I say this is because now he's going to say, these are called, these two levels are called understanding and wisdom. Now, why is he calling them levels? Usually people say Sfirot. When you look at the Sfirot, Bina and Chokhmah are on the same level. They're facing one another. That's true. But there's also the correspondence of the Sfirot to the worlds. And in the worlds, it is higher and lower. It's higher and lower consciousness. So Chokhmah is Atzilus. Chokhmah is emanation. And Bina is Bria. And what's the difference between Atzilus and Bria? Between emanation and creation, that emanation is completely God consciousness. There's nothing else there. But in Bria, there's already a state of being separate from God. So as much as when we look at the way the Sfirot look in the chart, in the tree of life, so they're facing one another, they seem to be on the same level. But when you look at them, when it comes to consciousness, one is above the other. They're not on the same level. You following? These are two different perspectives on the Sfirot. Okay? Mitzad bina tzarich liot nedarim. So from the point of view of understanding, vows are needed. Again, because that's the only way to survive when you're immersed in material, in the material world. Umitzad chokhmah tzarcha liot akirat haneder. There has to be a annulment. Okay. Why? Because Chokhmah is not ingrained in materiality. Chokhmah, wisdom, is above it. It's emanation. So from its point of view, to make a vow is improper. We said in the first time we learned last week on Friday. No, last week on Thursday. No, last week on Friday. It was Friday. We said that the tzaddik who is not immersed in the world is forbidden from making vows. Why is he forbidden from making vows? Because then he won't be enjoying the world. And somebody who's not subservient to materiality, who's not dependent on it, for them not to eat a fruit, for instance, is an avera. It's wrong. He should be enjoying it. But a person who is ingrained in materiality and feels that he's dependent on it, so he has to make a vow, because we said that's the only way he can survive. So in the individual, these are two different aspects of my soul. The aspect of my soul that corresponds to understanding, which is already ingrained in reality, in the corporeal world, physical world, it needs to make vows. But the aspect of emanation in me, which is my wisdom, is above that. For it to have a vow is an affront to its holiness. So one of them wants to make vows, and the other one wants to annul them. They go together also. I mean, the person has this understanding. What the Rebbe is presenting here, again, this is presented in all the Maimar and Likkutei Torah. What they present is that it's a complex reality within each individual. There's a side of me that needs the vows in order to survive in the physical world. There's a side of me that finds the vows an affront to my connection to God and my subservience to God. And it's okay. This is how a human being is structured. ההבדל שבין בינה לחוכמה הוא בינה הוא שכל וחוכמה היא ביטול. So what's going on here? The bina is the intellect itself, and chokhmah is a state of nullification. Like we said, it's emanation. And emanation is a state of nullification before God. There's no feeling of separateness. Atzilus. Sechel hu madud mugbar. Understanding bina, which is the intellect, is limited. Yesh gvul mesuyam l'sagat hasechel. There's only so much that the intellect can understand. מעבר לו, אין השגת השכל מסוגלת להגיע. Beyond that limit, the intellect cannot reach, and the person cannot understand. כשבאים לעניינים שהם למעלה מהשכל, when you come to things that are above the intellect, הרי אין לך רשות להרהר אחריה. שכן מאחר שעניינים אלו הם למעלה מהשכל, עלול שכל לטעות ולקבל אותם שלא כפי האמת. So in those places, it's better to refrain from thinking. Because if you think about them, you might come to a mistake. You might come to a misunderstanding. So it's better not to make that mistake, but rather to limit your attempt to understand. There are things that you need to... This is one of the problems. People go crazy trying to understand things that they can't. And then, because they can't go away without some kind of understanding, so they make something up. I'm very good at it, by the way. I do this a lot. I overthink. I can't show you this because I was told not to show you, not to show anyone, not you. I saw a note from the Rebbe on Likkutei Sichot, on the manuscripts, where they asked him a question that had been brought up, and he said, a lot of these questions that you're bringing me are people nitpicking and overthinking the point. Nobody says that. Right. Looking for, because you have to say something. So they make up some svara. They make up some idea. He says it's not. If it's a question that's a question on understanding, okay, so we have to explain I have to explain what I meant. But if it's an attempt to say something more or something like that, it could be that it's not true. It's simply not true. I don't know why they didn't want me to show this, but it's true. The Rebbe said this. I don't know what's so bad with it. For me, it was. I asked to receive a copy of it because I put it up in front of me. Because I have this problem that I try to go way beyond what my intellect can handle. Okay, so understanding has to have a limit. Because if you don't limit it, then you'll come to what is called, in the Tanakh, it's called, they are wise in order to do evil. Meaning they use their wisdom to do something negative. Again, there's no intent to do something negative, but that's what happens. When you try to use your intellect for something it's not good for. It's the same thing as you take a flatbed truck, a little one. Like those things with the, what do they call them? Four wheels, but it has its limits how much it can carry in the back. And I've seen pictures, videos of this, and somebody tries to put into the back, the pickup truck, into its back, the flatbed. So they try to put something too heavy. So what happens? The whole truck, they can't carry it. The whole thing breaks. You think, wow, this thing is so straight. It's like it's a monster, It's 10 feet high. I don't know, whatever. Still, there's a limit to what it can carry. The same thing is true about the intellect. You have to learn how to limit yourself if you're going beyond your depth. So one example of a neder that you wouldn't think about is that I come and say, I refrain from going into this topic because I've seen that I can't handle it. I don't understand it fully. Now it's very interesting. Should you say that, for instance, when you're learning Talmud, and you have a question in Iyun? Should you continue to try to understand? So there is a limit, even there. If you see that it's not coming, you can't understand what this Rishon is saying, you can't understand. Okay, so either go to someone who can explain it to you. Sometimes it helps, but then you see that usually if it's beyond your depth, you'll understand it. Either you understand what they're saying, or you understand it for a moment, but the moment you leave them, you can't make heads or tails of what they just said. You think you understand that moment, then it's gone. I remember when I was learning, I decided when I was younger, because of my ego, to learn Even Ezra alone. So I didn't have the ability to learn Even Ezra alone. So there's the Beis Shmuel and the Sma and the Cham, the Chakat Mechokek. So every once in a while, I would go up to the guy who was a Sholem Meishiv in the yeshiva. Now this guy, he literally knew everything by heart. He was one of these people. And he used to sit there for 2 hours just as a chesed, so that when the children would have questions and they have somebody to ask. So I'd come up to him and I ask him a question about a bash, about a Beis Shmuel. And he'd give, a very succinct, quick answer. It would take him like 30 seconds. And I listened to him and I said, and I went back. I didn't understand a word he said. And I should have understood that already, that I'm out of my depth completely. Like, stop learning this stuff. Start learning stuff that fits you. But no, it was a big action. Why? Because it was an ego thing. I had to show that because I had learned Choshev Mishpat with someone, I could learn Even Ezra by myself. Which was nonsense. And I lost a whole year because of that. I lost a whole year of learning things that I could have understood because I had this thing. So there has to be a neder. You have to be able to say, Bina has to know how to limit. And sometimes it means limiting yourself. In the sense that I don't get into this because this is too hard for me. I don't understand. I simply don't understand. It's really weird because, you're reading a text. Why could you not understand? Because the cheshbon there, the stuff that went into writing this text is pretty complex. And not every person can hold the whole argument in his mind and still have it clearly in front of him. Maybe you could get parts of it and sometimes reconstruct it, but he had it like this, and he didn't look at it before, but he remembered. He remembered that this is what the Bash says here. He just remembered because that's how his mind works. So one of the biggest problems in learning, which is what he's addressing here, is that you have this ego that tells you, I should be like the biggest lamdan in the world, biggest scholar. But you're not. Your brain is not built for it. You can push, maybe get a little bit, 5% improvement, 10% improvement. It's very uncommon for someone, just by learning, to be able to break that barrier. You need some kind of supernatural intervention. And it's not that people haven't had supernatural interventions. They have. But then you have to show something else. You have to show willpower, and you have to show nullification before Hashem. In any case. But from the point of view of wisdom, אין חשש שהאדם ייכשל, כתוצאה מהביטול שבחוכמה אינו מציאות לעצמו. But if he's doing everything out of self-nullification, what does this mean? He's not doing it out of ego. He's doing it because he wants to serve Hashem. And he says, to serve Hashem, I also have to learn Even Ezer. That's part of the Torah. I'm doing it not because I want to be called a scholar, I want to be called a rabbi, I want this, I want that. It's because it's part of the Torah. It's Bashtus. I have to learn it the way Reb Nachman said to learn it. You have to learn it. Yeah, by Reb Nachman, you just have to learn it. You understand. You understand. You understand more. You understand less. It doesn't matter. Yeah? Now, Reb Nachman was very smart in this. He said, from what I know, he said, just learn the Mechaber. Only learn the Shulchan Aruch itself. Don't learn the Nesei Kedim. Don't learn everything that's around it, because you won't understand most of them. Instead, just learn the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch, every person can understand. You understand whatever you understood. All the diukim, you won't get there. There's no way. But you'll go over it. Okay? So that's from the point of view of Chokhmah. Chokhmah is taking upon myself the yoke of heaven and saying, I'm nullified to God's will. I'm not a separate reality, and therefore, I can reach anything. I can learn it, but pashtus, even if I don't understand it. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to. It doesn't mean that I understand it. Yesterday I saw by Rav Ovadia that he writes that the people should not learn things that they don't understand. Okay. Very interesting. Said it. In any case. כדוגמת ההתבטלות בתפילת 18. What's another example of this? In davening, when a person is saying 18, עמידה. כשאדם עומד לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא כעבד כמימרי, when a person is standing before God as a slave stands in front of his master, כעבד לפני אדונו שאינו חש כלל במציאותו העצמית, and does not feel his being at all. Who was like that? Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were like that. They were a merkava, they were a chariot. So they didn't feel their own existence. Whatever the driver wants, that's what we do. And then all of his reality, all of his being is God's being. It's not his. And then anything that he has acquired belongs to his master. Here he says that when you have self-nullification, and again, this is the opposite side, that you're not like the Bina. Bina already has a sense of being. So it's learning for the sake of ego. There is some ego there. So that you have to limit. But in Chokhmah, there is no ego. So he's called this, what you get is an additional strength in your power of perception, in your power of understanding. And then you understand things better. And this, he brings here a very important source in Pirkei Avos, in note 22. As the sages said in Avos chapter 3, Mishnah 9, that anyone whose fear of heaven, or fear of sin here they call it, precedes his wisdom will stand. Meaning his wisdom will... The two words here, both Yirat Chet and Chokhmah, are talking about his feelings of nullification before God. That's his fear of sin. Not Yirat Onesh, Yirat Chet. He's afraid of sinning, meaning he's afraid to take off the yoke of heaven. So that's like what we explained, bittul. That's what bittul means. Then his chokhmah, here it means like his intellect in general will stand. Meaning, even if he learns things that are above what he can do, it will work. He'll be able to understand it. כאמור לעיל, שבכוח החכם להתיר נדר גם לזה שמצד עצמו היה זקוק לנדר, מצד הביטוי שבחוכמה הוא נותן כוח גם בבינה. So this is the idea that Chokhmah, like in the general case, is the wise man, the scholar who annuls, or the father who annuls the vows of the other of the woman, or in this case, the understanding. Okay, so he's saying, don't give up. He's not saying give up on. If you're coming from the point of view of the ego and an understanding, then you have to know that there are limits to what you can understand. But if you're willing to put wisdom first, and wisdom means self-nullification, then you will be able to annul the vows, you will be able to annul the limits of what the mind couldn't perceive before. Right? So you have to be very careful with this. Section 5. פרישות שמנדרים אינה רק משום שהדברים המותרים בהם הוא שקוע עלולים להביא או להיקשר בדברים האסורים, כי משום שעצם ההשתקעות בענייני היתר אינה רצויה, כי על ידי העסק בענייני העולם נעשה אצלו העולם למציאות התופסת מקום, הפך ההרגש שאין עוד מלבדו. It's not only because you need vows, not only, again, these are like spiritual vows, not only because you might come to do something wrong, also because just not to be dependent on the physical world, not to become too immersed in it. Okay? That's another reason. Why? Because when you become too immersed in the physical, you become too immersed in your ego in this case, then you don't feel that there's nothing but God. You don't even have moments of that. It's not that every person can live 100% of the time that there's nothing here but God. I took yesterday somebody to a shir. Rav Itzla gave a shir last night. So I took someone to Kfar Chabad in his house. And he's a person I haven't seen in 10 years. He used to be very, very close to the Rav, but he has MS, but it's very, very slowly progressing. But he's a lot worse than he was not a lot, but he's worse than what I saw him 10 years ago. He's a person who's suffered a lot in his life. And the suffering has brought him to a place where his psychology is such that he doesn't experience the world the way the regular people do. He can't. There's a lot of suffering there. He had other issues, a lot of other issues that happened to him in his life. It's a very strange life. It's the first time yesterday, because we had a long drive, and I saw that he was in a situation where he couldn't speak about the world in a normal way. So I got him to speak about his past. And at the end, it was very strange. My son was there, the other people were in the car, and he spoke very freely. He says to me, "Look, your mamash gave me life. I haven't been myself. I realize now I haven't been myself for years. When I came into the car, I wasn't able. He hardly walks now, but he doesn't use any walking sticks. He really wants to. But when he came in, he was like exactly like that. There's nothing holding him. Like he's not in the world. And when he came in, he kept repeating the same thing again and again and again and again, like 50 times. I had this dream when I was younger, and in the dream they showed me that all I am is a cloud. And I'm all the cloud. I'm not just part of the cloud. I'm the cloud itself. I'm everywhere. And he repeated this dream again and again, and he says, and I am before the Tzimtzum, and I'm before the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum. So, which is not crazy, but the fact that that's all he can grasp onto is like him holding for dear life. That his consciousness is like is almost like about to depart. So I got him to speak about his younger years. He's 60 now. He's 61. I got him to speak about when he was 20, 30, his army service. He was a big soldier, and then he went to America. He made tons of money, and he lost all of it. All kinds of things. But just even bringing that back, it brought him more into the world. So he's like in the world of Chachma. He's in the world of wisdom. And he doesn't have any bina. He has no connection, no affiliation with the material world. He can't, because the material world is causing him a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. He was. His wife passed away 10 years ago. That was the last time I saw it. Was at the funeral, and then we came again for the Shloshim. Not that I'm such a big tzaddik. I took the Rav. That was why I was there. He has 3 daughters. They're not married, and he's struggling very hard. But he's not struggling anymore. You see, he's like out of it already. So he lives in a state where there's nothing but God, and it's not a normal state. If you're there, either you're a tremendous tzaddik, or you have such suffering that you can't be connected to the world. It's not a normal state. But for a regular person to be too immersed in physicality, which is what our regular consciousness allows us to do, makes it impossible to even think about there's nothing but God. You can't even exercise it. You can't even think about that for a minute. How many times a day do you and I think that there's nothing but Hashem? I do that at least twice a day when I'm saying Shema, because I know that is what I should be thinking about. There's Hashem Echad, there's nothing but Hashem. And people say one, so they're misled. Hashem is unique, really is what it means. There's only Him, there's nothing else. That's really what you need to be thinking about Hashem. In any case. So that, I guess, is the end of our friendly time together. And we'll continue tomorrow. God willing.